She could lift an adult man with one arm alone, but no man wanted to touch her. Have you ever wondered why the gift that should have made her valuable turned her into the untouchable? In an ancient kingdom, hidden between the golden mountains of West Africa, there was a princess who broke all the rules. And I'm not talking about rules of etiquette. I'm talking about rules of physics. Her name was Amara, and she possessed the strength of 10 warriors. But in that society, a woman's strength wasn't seen as a gift. It was seen as a curse. Let me tell you an uncomfortable truth about ancient kingdoms, a truth that still echoes today. Beauty was measured by fragility. The more delicate a woman was, the more dependent, the more valuable she was considered on the marriage market. And Amara could carry water jars that 3 men had to lift together. She trained alone at dawn, when no one could see her, lifting stones the size of children as if they were feathers. The palace where she grew up was magnificent, with walls of red clay decorated with ancestral symbols in gold. But behind that beauty, there was a brutal system. Young women were prepared from an early age to be perfect wives, fragile flowers that needed masculine protection. And Amara didn't fit that mold. Her father, King Kofi, wore looks of concern whenever he saw her. Her mother, Queen Zara, sighed deeply every time Amara entered the throne room. Broad shoulders, muscular arms, and an upright, confident posture that announced her presence. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with deep brown eyes and skin that shone like polished bronze. But her beauty was overshadowed by something society couldn't accept: physical power. At 22 years old, Amara had already received 7 marriage proposals. 7 men who arrived full of hope and left with their masculinity shattered, not because she rejected them, but because they withdrew, unable to face what her strength revealed about themselves. The first suitor came when she was 18. He was the son of a wealthy merchant, a thin young man with a soft voice and hands that had never held anything heavier than scrolls. During the formal dinner, when he tried to show his strength by lifting a decorative wine jug to impress her, Amara instinctively reached out and grabbed the jug with 2 fingers, effortlessly. The silence that fell over the table was deafening. He never came back. The second suitor was different, a warrior from a neighboring kingdom, tall and muscular, with battle scars that he displayed with pride. He arrived confident, certain that finally there was a compatible match. During a ceremonial hunt organized by the king, a cart got stuck in the mud. 8 men tried to push it, grunting and sweating under the scorching sun. Amara watched from a distance, but when she realized they wouldn't succeed, she walked over, politely moved 2 men aside, placed her shoulders against the wood, and pushed. The cart came out of the mud as if it had silk wheels. The warrior looked at her, then looked at his own arms, and something died in his eyes. Male pride is a fragile thing. 3 days later, he left without saying goodbye. And so it was with all of them. One after another, men arrived at the palace with hopes and left with their masculinity shattered. The community began to whisper. At the markets, among the women selling fabrics, among the men negotiating grain, the name of Amara was spoken with pity, mixed with mockery. The princess that no man wants, strong as a buffalo but alone as a lost spirit. The king should have had sons. These words reached Amara's ears through the palace servants who gossiped when they thought she wasn't listening. And each word was like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples that never stopped expanding. Her mother began to pressure her with increasing intensity, and each conversation felt like an emotional knife. Amara, you need to understand. Strength doesn't warm a bed. Strength doesn't bring political alliances. You need to be more gentle, more feminine. I am feminine, mother, Amara replied, her voice steady even as her heart raged inside. Femininity doesn't mean weakness. For the men of this land, it does, the queen replied quietly. Sadness etched in her eyes, because she knew it was true. The king tried a different approach. He summoned Amara to the council hall, a place women rarely entered. The counselors looked at her with barely concealed discomfort while the king spoke. Daughter, I love you, but our kingdom needs alliances. Marriages are bridges between peoples, and you're burning these bridges before you even build them. Father, I didn't ask to be this way, Amara said, her voice trembling for the first time. I didn't choose this strength. It's simply who I am. Then hide it, one of the older counselors intervened, his voice harsh as stone grinding against stone. Act as if you're weak. Pretend to stumble. Ask for help carrying light things. Make men feel needed. The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. Amara looked around the room at these men who controlled the fate of thousands and realized something profoundly disturbing. They genuinely believed the solution was for her to pretend to be less than she was. I will not diminish myself to make insecure men feel powerful, she said, and left the room before they could respond. That night, alone in her chambers, Amara did what she always did when the pressure became unbearable. She waited until the palace fell asleep, until only the torches on the walls cast dancing shadows through the corridors, and then she slipped silently out to the training courtyard. It was a circular space surrounded by high walls where the king's warriors practiced during the day, but at night it belonged to her. There were stones of different sizes stacked in one corner, a collection she herself had gathered over the years. She started with the smallest ones, warming her muscles, feeling energy flow through her body like a river finding its natural course. Each lift was a prayer. Each movement was an affirmation of her existence. "I am Amara," she whispered to the night, "and my strength is not my shame." But even as she said those words, tears streamed down her face, because physical strength couldn't protect against emotional pain. She could lift stones, but she couldn't lift the weight of loneliness that grew in her chest like a spreading shadow. The kingdom began to treat her differently, not with open hostility, but with something worse: pity disguised as politeness. When she walked through the markets, conversations stopped. When she entered parties, polite smiles formed on faces that quickly turned away. She became a ghost in her own kingdom, seen but not truly perceived, acknowledged but not understood. There was a moment especially cruel that was seared into her memory like fire into wood. It was the wedding of a nobleman's daughter, an elaborate celebration with musicians, dancers, and food enough to feed an entire village. Amara went because her presence was expected, because a princess's absence would be noticed and remarked upon. She was standing near the food tables when she heard two young women talking. They didn't know she was there, hidden partially by a decorated column. "Do you think she'll die alone?" one asked, and it wasn't a malicious question. It was genuinely curious, like someone asking about the weather. "Probably," the other replied. "What man wants a woman who can beat him at arm wrestling? It's against nature. Poor thing. Beauty wasted on a body that scares men off, rather than attracts them." Amara left the party that night without saying goodbye. She walked back to the palace under a starlit sky that seemed to mock her loneliness with its brilliant vastness. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she felt something different forming inside her. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something more solid, more permanent. It was acceptance. Acceptance that she would never be what that kingdom wanted her to be. Acceptance that her strength was real, true, a fundamental part of who she was. And acceptance that perhaps, just perhaps, she'd have to find her happiness outside the boxes that had been forced upon her. So she did something radical for a princess. She stopped going to parties, stopped smiling politely when nobles visited, stopped pretending that the words didn't hurt her. Instead, she began training openly. Every morning at sunrise, she was in the training courtyard, lifting stones, running, practicing the combat movements that the king's warriors used. The palace guards watched her with a mixture of admiration and confusion. Some of the younger warriors began to respect her, though they never admitted it publicly. She was better than half of them, and everyone knew it. The king was furious at first. "You're making a spectacle of yourself. You're destroying your last chances of a good marriage." "What chances, father?" Amara replied, and her voice held no bitterness, only cold truth. "They never existed. I could fake weakness for 100 years, and the moment my true nature showed, the man would run. I'd rather live honestly than die slowly in a lie." Her mother tried a gentler approach. "Daughter, I understand your suffering, but think of the kingdom. Think of the dynasty. We need alliances." "Then marry off my younger brother," Amara suggested. She had two younger brothers, still adolescents, but already being prepared for political roles. "I won't be sacrificed on an altar of impossible expectations." Weeks turned into months. Amara established a routine that brought her peace, even amid the emotional chaos. She woke before dawn, trained until sweat poured down her skin, then bathed in the palace's private fountains and spent the rest of the day reading, studying war strategies, learning about governance and politics in ways princesses typically didn't. She became a stranger in her own court, but at least she was an authentic stranger. And then, on a seemingly ordinary morning, something changed. A messenger arrived at the palace, covered in road dust, his horse foam-flecked with exhaustion. He brought news from a neighboring kingdom, one with which Amara's realm maintained cordial but distant relations. "Bandits attacked a merchant caravan on the northern road," the messenger reported, kneeling before the king. "There are wounded. They're asking for help." The king immediately summoned his warriors. But there was a problem. Most of his best men were on a diplomatic mission in distant lands. Only palace guards and warriors in training remained, inexperienced for such a potentially dangerous rescue. Amara was present in the council chamber when that information was revealed. She saw the worry in her father's face, the hesitation of the counselors, and without thinking twice, she stepped forward. "I will go." The silence that followed was absolute. All eyes turned to her, some shocked, others incredulous. "You?" one counselor finally said. and there was pure disbelief in his voice. A princess on a rescue mission? Unthinkable. Why unthinkable? Amara challenged. I am stronger than half the warriors who remain. I am faster than most, and unlike you, I am not afraid to prove my worth. The king looked at her for a long moment. She saw something moving in his eyes, something between pride and fear. Finally, he nodded. Go, but take guards with you. Amara chose 4 palace guards, men whom she had seen train and who, despite the general prejudice, respected her. They set out before noon, horses galloping down the dusty road that led to the northern mountains. The journey took 3 hours. When they arrived at the site of the attack, they found exactly what the messenger had described. Overturned caravans, goods scattered about, 5 wounded men being tended to by frightened merchants. But there was something more. Among the wounded, partially hidden by a torn cloth, was a man different from the others. He was younger, dressed in clothes that were once fine, but now stained with blood and dust. He had a deep cut on his shoulder and was unconscious. Who is this? Amara asked, kneeling beside him. The merchants exchanged nervous glances. We do not know, princess. He was traveling alone, joined our caravan 2 days ago. He said he was a scholar heading to the eastern lands. Amara studied the man's face. Even wounded and unconscious, there was something about him that commanded attention. A quiet dignity in the line of his jaw, a contained strength even in vulnerability. His hands, though dirty, bore calluses that indicated both the handling of weapons and tools. We need to take them back, she said, straightening up. All of them. That was when one of the guards she brought intervened. Princess, our horses cannot carry so many wounded. Amara looked around, assessing the situation with the strategic mind she had developed in her solitary studies. There was a cart there, overturned but still usable. If they could ride it. Help me with this, she ordered, walking to the cart. 3 guards followed her, preparing themselves for the arduous task of lifting the heavy vehicle. But when they positioned themselves, Amara simply placed her shoulders under the side of the cart and pushed. The vehicle righted itself with a creak of wood, raising dust. The merchants watched her with wide eyes. The guards who came with her simply smiled. They were already used to it. But there, on that dusty road under the midday sun, something changed. Amara's strength was not seen as shame. It was seen as salvation. Load the wounded, she ordered, and her voice carried the natural authority of one born to lead. We returned before nightfall, but while they helped the men into the cart, while they prepared for the return journey, Amara did not know something crucial. That unconscious man, that supposed scholar covered in blood and dust, was not who he seemed to be. He had a secret that would change everything. And destiny, that invisible weaver of stories, was only beginning to intertwine its threads. But the fragile peace of that morning was about to shatter. Because in the royal palace, behind gilded doors and silk curtains, a decision was being made. A decision that would change Amara's destiny forever. The royal council convened that afternoon. 7 elders seated in carved mahogany chairs, their faces marked by age and tradition. At the center of the oval table, Queen Mother Kaya, a woman in her 60s with eyes as sharp as blades and a voice that cut deeper than any sword. My daughter, she began, the words heavy as stones cast into still water. You are 25 years old. 25 years, Amara, and there is still no man at your side. There are still no heirs. There is still no future. Amara remained standing before the council, her posture upright, her broad, muscular shoulders tense under the weight of the words. She knew what was coming. She had waited for it. But knowing did not make the pain any less sharp. The people murmur, continued one of the elders, his voice trembling but inflexible. They say you are cursed. That no man of standing would accept a princess who looks more like a warrior than a wife. Another elder intervened. They say you bring shame to the royal lineage. That your appearance is a sign that the gods are displeased. Amara felt the words pierce through her invisible armor one by one. Each accusation was a sharp knife. She wanted to scream, wanted to defend herself, wanted to say that her muscles were the result of training and discipline, not curse. But she remained silent, because silence was all that remained for her. Queen Mother Kaya raised her hand, silencing the elders. Amara, my daughter, listen carefully. This council has decided that you will marry within 3 moons. To any man willing to accept you, noble or peasant, young or old. Anyone at all who is willing. The words hung in the air like a sentence of death. Anyone willing, Amara repeated, her voice low but firm. Are you saying I'm so undesirable that we'll accept literally any man? I'm saying, replied the Queen Mother, her eyes hard as obsidian, that the kingdom needs stability. And you, my daughter, are a source of instability. A princess unmarried at 25 is a shame. A muscular princess and unmarried? A catastrophe. Amara felt the ground sway beneath her feet, but she did not allow her expression to change. She did not allow them to see the storm tearing through her heart. 3 moons, said the Queen Mother, ending the meeting. You have 3 moons to find a husband, or we will find one for you. And that was only the beginning. 2 days later, Amara walked through the central market, a vibrant place, full of colors, aromas, and voices. Tropical fruit stands, bright fabrics and handcrafted jewels spread across the plaza. It was a place she used to love, but that day, the market seemed different. Hostile, judgmental. She wore a simple dress, trying to blend into the crowd, but it was impossible. Her broad shoulders, her defined arms, her imposing stature, everything about her commanded attention. And everyone noticed. Look, whispered a woman to her friend, pointing discreetly. It's the muscular princess. They say she still hasn't found a husband. The friend laughed softly. What man would want a woman like that? She looks like she could break him in half. Amara pretended not to hear. She continued walking, head held high, eyes fixed ahead. But each whisper cut deep. Each look of pity or scorn stung like a slap. Then she saw someone familiar. Zara, her childhood friend. The girl with whom she had run through the palace gardens, laughing and dreaming about the future. Zara was standing near a fabric stand, accompanied by 2 other women. Amara approached, a hesitant smile on her lips. Zara. Zara turned. For an instant, their eyes met, but then something changed. Zara looked at the 2 women at her side, then back at Amara, and she turned her face away. Forgive me, said Zara, her voice cold as ice. I have things to do. And she walked away. The 2 women at Zara's side laughed openly. One of them said, loud enough for Amara to hear, not even her own friends want her around. Apparently, even friendship has its limits. Amara remained motionless, something inside her breaking. This wasn't just rejection, it was betrayal. It was confirmation that she was utterly alone. She turned and left the market, her eyes burning but without tears. Because she had learned over the years that tears changed nothing, that pain asked no permission. That loneliness was a silent and permanent companion. But while Amara faced public humiliation in her kingdom, hundreds of kilometers away, another destiny was being woven. In a kingdom hidden by the mountains of the west lived a man few knew. His name was Kofi, and although his title was king, he did not rule with pomp or ostentation. His kingdom was small, hidden between snow-capped peaks and deep valleys, a place that the rest of the world had forgotten. But Kofi didn't care, because he measured value not by the grandeur of palaces, but by the strength of character. Kofi was 30 years old, tall, lean but strong, with dark eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. He had inherited the throne at 22, following the sudden death of his father, and since then, he had dedicated his life to ruling with justice. Not with rigid laws, but with compassion. Not with harsh punishments, but with understanding. His people loved him. Children ran up to him in the streets, calling him King Kofi the Just. The elders consulted him, trusting in his wisdom despite his youth, and the women of the kingdom admired him, not just for his appearance, but for his kindness. But Kofi carried a secret that few knew, a secret that was about to put him in mortal danger. That morning, Kofi was sitting in his audience chamber, a simple room, with stone walls and open windows that allowed the mountain breeze to enter. Before him, a messenger kneeling, breathless, his clothes covered in dust. "My king," said the messenger, his voice urgent, "I bring news from the Eastern Kingdom. The Council of 5 Kingdoms has called a meeting. They demand your presence." Kofi frowned. "The Council of 5 Kingdoms? They haven't met in 10 years. Why now?" The messenger swallowed hard. "They say there is a conspiracy, my king, that someone plans to take the throne of one of the kingdoms, and they suspect you may be the next target." Kofi felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that his kingdom, though small, held treasures that many coveted. Precious stone mines hidden in the mountains, fertile lands in the valleys, and, more importantly, a strategic position that controlled the trade routes between the northern and southern kingdoms. "When is the meeting?" Kofi asked. "In 15 days, my king. In the sacred city, in the heart of the ancient forest. All 5 kings must attend, without exception." Kofi nodded slowly. "Then I will go." But his closest advisor, an elderly man named Igbo, approached. "My king, this could be a trap. If there is a conspiracy, attending this meeting could put you in danger." Kofi looked at Igbo, his eyes calm but resolute. "And if I don't go, Igbo, what will they say? That I am afraid? That I am weak? No, I will go. But I will go prepared." And it was in that very moment that everything began to change. Because while Kofi made his decision, somewhere in the palace shadows, a man watched. A man with cold eyes and hands stained with betrayal. His name was Kwame, and he was the captain of Kofi's royal guard. But he was also a traitor, sold to the neighboring kingdom for promises of gold and power, and he had already sent a secret message. "The king will travel in 15 days, alone, with only a small escort. Prepare the ambush." The conspiracy was in motion, and Kofi, innocent and confident, was walking straight into a deadly trap. Meanwhile, Amara returned to the palace that night, her heart heavy. She climbed to her chambers, locked the door, and looked out the window. The full moon shone in the dark sky, illuminating the gardens below. She thought of the council's decision. 3 moons to find a husband, or be forced to marry any man willing to accept her. And then, something inside her broke, not with a bang, but with a silent sigh. Resignation gave way to determination. Pain gave way to anger. And shame gave way to a radical decision. "I will not marry," she whispered to the moon. "I will not submit to this. If they see me as a burden, then I will free myself from that burden." She opened her carved wooden chest and began selecting clothes. Simple, practical garments. Clothes that would allow her to travel without being recognized. She took a leather bag and began filling it with provisions. Bread, dried fruit, water. She was planning to escape, because staying meant accepting a life of humiliation. It meant marrying a man who didn't love her, just to satisfy the expectations of a kingdom that had never accepted her. And Amara, the muscular princess who had spent her life being rejected, finally decided that she deserved more. She would leave at dawn. She would go to the mountains of the west, where isolated kingdoms were said to offer refuge to those seeking a fresh start. Where no one would know her, where she could be just Amara, not the shameful princess, not the royal burden, just a free woman. And while Amara made her plans, Kofi made his. He gathered his small escort. Only 5 men, loyal warriors, but not enough to face an army. He prepared his baggage, maps, provisions, diplomatic gifts, and he traced the route. The journey would take 7 days, crossing the mountains, descending through the valleys, passing through the ancient forest until reaching the sacred city. It was a dangerous route, known for bandits and wild beasts, but it was the only possible route. Igbo, the advisor, tried one more time to dissuade him. "My king, I beg you, send a representative in your place. Do not risk your life." But Kofi only smiled. "Igbo, my friend, if I cannot trust the other kings, how can I expect them to trust me? I will go, and I will return. You will see." And so 2 destinies began to converge. Amara, fleeing from a kingdom that rejected her, traveling to the mountains of the west. Kofi, traveling to the sacred city, crossing the same mountains. 2 paths, 2 wounded souls. 1 intertwined destiny. And then, the first spark of danger. The night before Kofi's departure, Kwame, the traitorous captain, met secretly with 3 hooded men. They met in an abandoned tavern on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes. "The king departs tomorrow at dawn," said Kwame, his voice low and conspiratorial. "He will take only 5 guards. The ambush must occur in the mountain pass. 3 days' travel from here. There, you will have the advantage. And there he will fall." One of the hooded men asked, "And you? What do you gain from this?" Kwame smiled coldly. "Half of the promised gold, and the position of regent after the king's death. You will keep the mines. I will keep the power." The men agreed, and the trap was sealed. But what Kwame didn't know was that one of the palace servants had overheard fragments of the conversation. A young man named Dele, loyal to Kofi. And although he hadn't heard all the details, he had heard enough to realize that the king was in mortal danger. Dele ran back to the palace, desperate to warn Kofi. But when he arrived, the king was already sleeping, and the guards would not let him pass. "Come back tomorrow," they said. "The king needs to rest." And so the message remained undelivered. The warning went unspoken. And Kofi, innocent and confident, fell asleep without knowing that assassins were already on their way. Amara didn't sleep that night either. She sat by the window, gazing at the stars and imagining the new life that awaited her. She thought of her mother. She thought of Zara, who had betrayed her. She thought of all the years of rejection and pain. And then she made a silent promise. "I will prove that I am worth more than they think. I will find a place where I will be accepted, where I will be valued, where I will be loved." And with that promise in her heart, she finally closed her eyes. Meanwhile, in the western mountains, a storm was approaching. Dark clouds accumulated on the horizon. Thunder echoed between the peaks. And in the shadows of the ancient forest, men with sharp knives and even sharper hearts waited. 2 destinies were about to cross. A rejected princess, fleeing in search of freedom. A just king, innocently walking into a deadly trap. And when their paths met, nothing would be the same again. Because sometimes destiny doesn't ask permission. It simply happens. And when it unites 2 souls who have been rejected, despised, and underestimated, something extraordinary emerges. But that union was still to come. And before it, there would be blood, danger, and choices that would define everything. The 2 would depart at dawn, each on their journey, each with their wounds, each unaware that the person who would change their lives forever was just days away. And in the shadows, the assassins waited. The storm approached, and destiny prepared the stage for a meeting that no one could foresee. Their lives were about to collide in ways neither could imagine. The forest between the two kingdoms had no name. Travelers called it simply the Forgotten Territory, a stretch of land where no king claimed dominion and no law existed beyond survival. It was here that Amara walked now, her bag of provisions on her back, the afternoon sun filtering through the dense canopy of trees. She had left the palace 3 days before. No grand farewell, no departure ceremony, just a letter left on her father's bedside table. I seek a purpose that is not defined by my strength or by your shame. Do not look for me. Her leg muscles throbbed with each step. It was liberating, this exhaustion. No one here knew her. No one whispered as she passed. No one looked away with pity or contempt. Here, she was just a traveler. The path narrowed ahead, flanked by rocky cliffs on one side and a steep drop on the other. Amara slowed, her warrior instincts alert. This was exactly the kind of place where bandits waited, where the desperate hid. That's when she heard voices. No, not voices. A voice. Deep, calm, but with a thread of tension that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. I don't carry gold, the voice said. I'm a simple traveler, like you. Laughter, multiple, harsh and cruel. Amara approached silently, moving between the trees with the grace of a predator. Through the foliage, she took in the scene. 4 armed men with knives and clubs surrounded a single traveler. The man in the center was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a simple traveler's tunic. Dark hair bound behind his head. There were no jewels, no sign of wealth. But there was something in his posture, a silent dignity, a calm that didn't stem from fear, but from some deep inner certainty. Maybe you don't carry gold, one of the bandits growled, spinning a dirty knife. But those boots look good, and that tunic. Strip everything. The traveler didn't move. I won't do that. His voice was firm, not defiant, just firm. As if he were declaring an immutable fact of the universe. Amara felt something strange stir in her chest. Admiration? No. It was deeper than that. Recognition. This man was alone, outnumbered, clearly without a chance, but he didn't bend. Not out of stupidity, but because there were lines he wouldn't cross, even under threat of death. Then we'll take it from you, another bandit hissed, advancing. Amara should have kept walking. It wasn't her problem. She had left her kingdom precisely to escape this kind of complication, to find a place where she didn't have to be the warrior, where she didn't have to be the woman with strength that frightened men. But her feet didn't move. The first bandit attacked, a knife glinting in the filtered light. The traveler dodged, blocking the attacker's wrist with his forearm and spinning away. The movement was trained, military, but he didn't counterattack. He just defended himself, backing away, trying to create space. A trained warrior! One of the bandits cried out with sickly delight. This is going to be fun. Now all 4 attacked together. The traveler fought valiantly, blocking, dodging, using the rocky terrain to his advantage. But Amara could see what he couldn't. He was being systematically pushed toward the cliff edge. 10 more steps and he'd fall. 5 more steps. The traveler stumbled on a root, falling to his knees. A bandit raised a thick club, preparing to smash his skull. Time seemed to slow down. Amara saw the club begin to descend. She saw the traveler raise his arm in futile defense. She saw death approach with the inevitability of a storm. And then she saw something more. She saw the look in the traveler's eyes. Not panic, but sadness. Sadness that his journey would end here. Sadness for unspoken things, unfulfilled promises, a purpose left unfinished. It was a perfect mirror of her own soul. Amara moved. She exploded through the foliage like lightning, crossing the 20 paces in 3 heartbeats. Her hand grabbed the bandit's wrist mid-swing, stopping the club inches from the traveler's skull. The shock on the bandit's face would have been comical in other circumstances. What? Amara twisted. The club fell. The bandit screamed, clutching his wrist, now bent at an impossible angle. The other 3 froze, processing this new threat. A woman, alone, dressed in simple traveling clothes. Go away, Amara said calmly, releasing the wounded bandit. Now. The largest of the bandits laughed. Or what? You'll hurt us with your pretty looks? He advanced, knife drawn. Amara didn't think, didn't plan. Her body reacted with the muscle memory of 1,000 hours of training. She captured his wrist, twisted under his arm, and used his own momentum against him. The big bandit was thrown over her hip like a sack of grain, hitting the ground hard enough to expel all the air from his lungs. Silence. The 2 remaining bandits looked at their companion on the ground, then at Amara, then at each other. Which? One of them whispered. No, Amara replied, her voice low and dangerous. Just tired of cowardly men attacking defenseless travelers. Here's what's going to happen. You'll pick up your wounded friends and disappear from this forest. If I see you again, I won't be nearly as merciful. They ran, They literally dragged their two wounded companions and disappeared down the trail in a confusion of limbs and screams of pain. Amara stood still, her heart hammering, adrenaline pulsing in her veins. She had done it, revealed her strength, used her power. After swearing to herself that she wouldn't be a warrior anymore, she had. That was extraordinary. The voice made her turn. The traveler was standing now, brushing dust from his clothes, but he wasn't backing away, wasn't looking at her with fear or disgust. He was smiling. A genuine and warm smile that reached his eyes. "You saved my life," he said simply. "Thank you." Amara blinked. She'd expected rejection, disgust, that look all men gave when they saw what she could do. But his face showed only gratitude, and something more. Admiration? It was nothing, she murmured, looking away. "Nothing?" He laughed, a rich sound that rolled across the clearing. "You just defeated 4 armed men in about 10 seconds. Without a weapon. That's not nothing. That's remarkable." Something warm and strange bloomed in Amara's chest. When had someone last called her strength remarkable instead of shameful? "They were incompetent bandits," she said, trying to downplay it. "Incompetent or not, there were still 4 knives pointed at me." He extended his hand. "I'm Malik, traveler, apparently very bad at avoiding ambushes." She looked at the outstretched hand. Such a simple gesture, yet laden with meaning. To accept it was to admit connection, to allow herself to be seen. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. It was calloused, warm, strong, but unafraid of her strength. "Amara," she said softly. "Also a traveler, apparently very bad at not getting involved in other people's troubles." Malik laughed again, and Amara felt something shift in her heart. A crack in the walls she'd built, a glimpse of possibility she'd thought lost forever. Here was a man who looked at her strength and saw beauty. Not threat, not shame, only beauty. "Where are you going?" Malik asked, releasing her hand but not his gaze. "Far," Amara answered honestly. "Far from expectations, far from disappointments, just far." Something crossed Malik's face. Understanding. Deep solidarity. "I know that feeling," he said calmly. "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't leaving. It's discovering who you are when everyone stops telling you who you should be." The words struck Amara like a physical blow. This stranger, this ordinary man she'd saved on impulse, had articulated the deepest longing of her soul with more clarity than she ever had. "Are you running away too?" she asked. "Not running away," Malik corrected gently. "Seeking. There's a difference." "What?" "Running away is about fear. Seeking is about hope." His eyes met hers. "You seem like someone full of hope to me, even if you try to hide it." Amara opened her mouth to respond, to disagree, to raise her defenses again when the ground trembled. Both froze. "Was that an earthquake?" Amara whispered. "No." Malik's face had gone pale. "Not in this region. The soil here is..." The ground trembled again. Harder this time. And then, through the trees, came a sound that made Amara's blood freeze. A roar. Not a lion's roar. Not a bear's. It was deeper. More ancient. The sound of something that shouldn't exist. "Run!" Malik said, his voice suddenly urgent. He grabbed Amara's arm. "Now! We need to..." The creature burst through the tree line. It was immense. 4 times the size of an elephant, with dark green scales that shimmered like metal in the filtered sunlight. Its eyes were yellow, lidless, fixed on them with primal hunger. The claws, each one as long as Amara's arm, tore at the earth as it advanced. A dragon. Not the dragons from fairy tales. Not the noble creatures of legend. This was a primitive predator. A killer from a forgotten age that had somehow survived in the nameless forest's dark depths. And it was blocking the only escape path. Malik pulled Amara back, positioning himself between her and the beast. "When I distract it, you run. Understand? Don't look back. Just run." "Are you insane?" Amara hissed, trying to push him aside. "That thing will kill you!" Better one of us dies than both. His reckless nobility, his willingness to die for a stranger he'd just met. This is what made him different, Amara realized. Not physical strength, not fighting ability, but a moral spine made of something stronger than steel. A kindness that didn't calculate cost. The dragon advanced, its jaws opening to reveal rows of teeth like swords. Malik picked up a stone, preparing to throw at a meager distraction against such a creature. And Amara faced the choice that would define the rest of her life. She could run, leave him to die, preserve her disguise, her escape, her search for a place where she didn't need to be a warrior. Or she could stay. She could fight. She could be exactly what she had spent her entire life trying to hide. The woman whose muscles were stronger than most men, whose training had made her a living weapon, whose strength everyone called a curse. The dragon roared again, so close now that Amara felt the heat of its breath. Malik raised his arm to throw his pathetic stone, and Amara made her decision. She stepped in front of Malik, pushing him back with one hand while facing the creature directly. Amara, what are you? Stay behind me, she said, her voice transformed. No longer the timid traveler, but the warrior she was born to be. The voice of the princess who once commanded armies, before her father decided that strength in a woman was something to hide rather than celebrate. The dragon lunged, and for the first time in years, Amara stopped being ashamed of her power. She let the beast come, because what she would do next would change both their lives forever. The earth trembled. The dragon opened its jaws. The shame that had followed her entire life fell at her feet like a heavy cloak she finally had permission to discard. Malik looked at her with those eyes full of gratitude and hope, and something inside her broke, not from pain, but from liberation. For the first time in her life, Amara didn't see her strength as a curse. She saw a choice, and she chose to act. And then she ran. The roar of the beast echoed through the forest like living thunder. Amara could feel the earth trembling beneath her feet as she approached the clearing where Malik's men fought desperately. 3 guards were already on the ground, bleeding. 2 others wielded spears with trembling hands against a creature that looked like it had come from the deepest nightmares of the earth. A giant leopard, but deformed, with fur bristling like blades and eyes red as embers. One of the guards screamed when the beast advanced, its claws tearing through the air. He didn't have time to dodge, but Amara did. She threw herself between the guard and the creature, her arms rising instinctively. The impact was brutal. The beast's claws dug into her forearms, tearing tissue and skin, but Amara didn't retreat. Her muscles contracted like tempered steel, and she held the beast's front paws with superhuman strength. The leopard roared in fury and confusion. It had never encountered prey that didn't flee, prey that resisted. Amara roared back. With an explosive movement, she twisted her body and hurled the beast against a nearby tree. The impact was so violent that the trunk cracked. The creature fell to the ground, stunned, but still dangerous. "Fall back!" Amara shouted to the guards, who looked at her as if they were seeing a ghost. "Take Malik away from here, now!" But the beast was already rising, its red eyes now fixed solely on her. It recognized the true threat, and Amara recognized her own power. The creature advanced again, faster this time, a storm of claws and fangs. Amara moved like she had never moved before. She didn't fight against her strength, she embraced it. Every muscle, every fiber of her being that had been ridiculed, rejected, humiliated, now served a purpose. She dodged the first lunge, grabbed the beast's tail, and with a roar that echoed through the forest, lifted it off the ground and spun it through the air as if it were just a sack of grain. The beast flew over the trees before crashing down heavily several meters away. Silence. The guards were paralyzed. Malik, leaning against a tree, watched with wide eyes, and Amara, gasping, covered in blood that wasn't entirely her own, stood in the center of the clearing like a force of nature. The beast tried to rise one last time, but its limbs trembled. It looked at Amara, and something changed in its eyes. It was no longer fury. It was recognition, respect. And then, with one last low growl, the creature retreated into the darkness of the forest, limping, defeated. Amara let her arms fall to her sides. Her chest rose and fell with deep breaths. Blood streamed from her wounds, but the pain was distant. All she felt was clarity. "Never!" Malik's voice came from behind her, trembling with admiration. "Never have I seen such strength." She turned to face him. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to shrink until it contained only the 2 of them. Malik approached, limping slightly but refusing help from the guards. When he finally stood before her, he raised a trembling hand and gently touched her wounded arm. "You are not an aberration," he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "You are magnificent." Tears burned in Amara's eyes. No one had ever said those words to her. No one had looked at her strength and seen beauty. But he did. Amara swallowed, feeling her throat tighten. "I spent my whole life hearing that my strength was a shame, that I was too much for anyone to love, that I would be condemned to solitude because of it." Kwame shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Whoever told you that didn't understand what true strength means. It's not just the power to destroy. It's the power to protect, to save, to choose." He stepped closer, and Amara could feel his warmth, the intensity of his presence. "You chose to save me," he continued, his voice almost a whisper. "A stranger. You risked your life without hesitation. That's not brute force. That's courage. That's nobility." Nobility. The word sounded strange coming from him. There was something in the way he spoke, an elegant cadence, a careful choice of words that didn't match a simple traveler. But before Amara could question, one of the guards approached, interrupting the moment. "Sir, we need to treat her. These wounds..." Kwame nodded quickly, but his eyes were still fixed on Amara. "Yes, of course. Let's find shelter. And clean water." They walked together through the forest, Amara refusing any support despite her wounds. Kwame stayed at her side, watching her with a mixture of concern and something deeper admiration, perhaps even reverence. As night fell, they found a small spring. Kwame insisted on cleaning her wounds himself, his hands surprisingly skilled and gentle, as he washed away the blood and tied clean cloth around her arms. "You have careful hands," Amara observed, studying him. "For someone who travels alone." Kwame smiled, though sadness flickered across his face. "I haven't always traveled alone." "What happened?" He paused, his fingers still holding her wrist as he tied the final knot. "Sometimes, the life we're born to live isn't the life we want, and sometimes we run, even when we know we can't run forever." There was weight in those words, a burden that Amara recognized, even without fully understanding. "Are you running from something?" she asked softly. Kwame lifted his eyes to her, and for a moment, she saw something breaking behind that calm facade. Vulnerability, fear, loneliness. "I'm running from a life I didn't choose," he admitted. "A life of impossible expectations, of people who look at me and see only what I represent, never who I really am." Amara felt her heart tighten. She knew that pain, being reduced to a single trait, being judged before being known. "I understand," she whispered. "More than you imagine." They sat in silence for a long moment, the spring water murmuring softly in the background. Then Kwame spoke again, his voice low and intimate. "Tell me about you, your story. How did someone so extraordinary end up alone in that village?" And Amara told. For the first time in years, she opened that part of herself that she had locked away so carefully. She spoke of a childhood surrounded by whispers, of men who rejected her, laughing at her appearance, of women who avoided her, afraid that their husbands would find her more capable, stronger. "They said I'd never have a home," she finished, her voice breaking slightly. "That no man would want me, that I was destined to be alone." Kwame held her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers with a tenderness that made her tremble. "They were wrong," he said firmly. "So wrong it's almost laughable. You're not hard to love, Amara. You're hard to forget." Tears fell silently down her cheeks, not from sadness but from relief. From being seen. Really seen. "And you?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "Who are you really, Kwame?" He hesitated. For a moment it seemed he would reveal something monumental. But then, voices echoed through the forest. The guards immediately became alert, hands on weapons. But Kwame raised his hand, calming them. "They're messengers," he said, his voice changing subtly, becoming more formal, more controlled. 3 men emerged from the darkness, wearing robes adorned with symbols that Amara didn't immediately recognize. But there was something in the way they moved, the reverence with which they approached. The leader of the group saw Kwame and immediately fell to his knees. "My lord," he said, his voice laden with urgency and respect. "We've finally found you." Amara frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "My lord?" Kwame closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing an inevitable blow. "Rise," he ordered, and his voice carried an authority that Amara had never heard before. "What is the message?" "The council demands your immediate return. The northern provinces are in turmoil. They need your leadership." Amara's world began to spin. Provinces, council, leadership. Kwame slowly turned to her, and the expression on his face was pure anguish. "Amara." But she was already backing away, understanding crashing over her like a cold wave. "Who are you?" she whispered, although part of her already knew the answer. The messenger looked between them, confused, and then spoke the words that would change everything. "He is Kwame Ose, king of the United Lands of the South." The silence that followed was deafening. Amara looked at the man before her, the man who had held her hand, who had called her strength magnificent, who had seen in her what no one else had seen. And he was a king who had hidden his true identity, who had let her open up, reveal herself, fall in love. "You lied," she whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than any leopard's claw. "No." Kwame took a step toward her, desperation in his voice. "I never lied. I needed to be just a man. Just for a moment. Not a king, not a symbol. But you are a king." Amara stepped back further, tears streaming down her face. "And I'm just a rejected woman from a forgotten village." "You're not just anything!" Kwame insisted, reaching for her. "You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Your birth doesn't change that." But his words sounded hollow now, because the truth about who he really was would shatter everything that had begun to bloom between them. And as Amara looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity mixed with guilt, a single question burned in her mind. What could a king want with someone like her? What could a king want with someone like her? And more importantly, what could she mean to a man whose entire world was watching his every move? The answer would come, but it wouldn't be simple. And what happened next would test not just her physical strength, but the strength of her heart. The sound of horse hooves echoed through the forest before they could even see who was approaching. Amara lifted her head, alert. The stranger at her side tensed, his expression shifting from calm to concern in an instant. They were cavalrymen, not bandits or common hunters, but men mounted on magnificent horses, dressed in armor that gleamed even beneath the tree shade, and at the front of them, a banner that she didn't recognize, but that clearly meant something important. "Your Majesty!" shouted the cavalryman at the front, dismounting before the horse had even fully stopped. "Thank heavens we found you. The entire kingdom is searching!" Amara blinked. "Majesty?" She looked at the man at her side, expecting him to correct the mistake, but he corrected nothing. Instead, he sighed deeply, as if he had carried a weight for too long, and could finally set it down. "Majesty?" she repeated, her voice small and confused. What is he talking about? The stranger, the man she had saved from death, turned to her with eyes full of something she couldn't name. Regret, fear, relief? "There's something I need to tell you," he said softly. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." The cavalrymen waited in respectful silence, but their curious eyes flickered between the king and the woman at his side. Amara felt the weight of their gazes. She knew that kind of judgment all too well. "I'm not just a traveler," he began, each word weighing like stone. "My name is Kofi, and I am the king of the kingdom of Ashanti. My name is Kofi, and I am the king of the kingdom of Ashanti." Amara's world stopped. King. The word echoed in her mind like thunder rolling across distant skies. The man she had carried on her back, whose wounds she had tended, whose life she had saved, he was not a simple merchant or warrior. He was a king. You are... The words died on her lips. "I was traveling in disguise," Kofi continued, his voice gaining urgency. "There was a conspiracy in the palace. Plans for assassination. I needed to get away, needed to find out who my true allies were. And I needed..." He hesitated. "I needed to know what was real. Who would value me for who I am, not for what I possess." Amara took a step back. The implications fell upon her like cold rain. He had lied, or at least omitted the truth. Everything they had shared, every conversation, every moment of vulnerability, had been built on an incomplete foundation. "You lied to me," she whispered. "I omitted," he corrected, extending his hand, but not touching her. "And I'm sorry. But everything I said about you, about what I feel, about who you are, that was absolutely true." The cavalryman at the front cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but we need to return. The kingdom is unstable. There are urgent decisions that require your presence." Kofi waved his hand without taking his eyes off Amara. "In a moment," but Amara was already moving away, her mind spinning in countless directions. A king, he was a king. And her? She was the woman no man wanted, the daughter rejected by her own family, the warrior whose very body had been a subject of mockery and scorn. "I can't," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't be what you need." "Amara, wait." "No." The word came out louder than she intended. "You don't understand. I'm the person nobody wanted. My family rejected me. The men in my village laughed at me. I'm not fit to stand beside a king." The silence that followed was heavy. The cavalrymen looked away, uncomfortable with the raw motion in the air. But Kofi didn't look away. He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough that she could see every nuance of expression on his face. "You saved my life," he said, his voice low but firm. "When I was defenseless, you didn't abandon me. When I was broken, you carried me on your back. When I had nothing to offer, you gave me compassion. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't have," Kofi interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "And you know it. Most people would have walked past me, would have let me die because helping is inconvenient, risky, difficult. But you didn't. You, with your strength that others ridicule, carried me. You, with your courage that others don't understand, protected me." Tears began to form in Amara's eyes, but she blinked fiercely to drive them away. "You think you are not adequate?" Kofi continued, and now his voice held something of righteous anger. "Let me tell you something. I have known nobles who do not have a third of your honor. I have known warriors who do not have a quarter of your courage. I have known courtiers who would spend their entire lives learning and never reach your integrity of character." He extended his hand again, and this time, he touched her arm gently. "You are the only person adequate to stand beside me." The words fell upon Amara like sun after a storm. She heard them, but could barely believe them. How could it be true? How could a woman rejected by everyone be the choice of a king? "But I am," she began. "You are strong," Kofi interrupted. "You are courageous. You are compassionate. You are everything I need. Everything my kingdom needs." In that moment, something shifted in the air between them. The knights watched now with what seemed like respect. One of them, a grizzled warrior bearing the marks of countless battles, nodded slowly, as if he finally understood something important. "Your Majesty is right," the knight said softly. "True nobility is not in blood. It is in actions." Kofi smiled, not taking his eyes off Amara. "Come with me," he said, "not as my obligation or my duty, but as my choice. My partner, my queen." Queen. The word hung between them, so absurd, so impossible that Amara nearly laughed. But something in Kofi's expression, in the raw sincerity burning in his eyes, held her silent. "I know nothing about being a queen," she whispered. "And I knew nothing about being saved by someone who truly cared," Kofi replied. "But you taught me, and I will teach you everything you need to know. Together." Amara looked at the knights, at their magnificent horses, at the royal standard fluttering in the wind. Then she looked at Kofi, at the man she had saved, who was now saving her in a completely different way. "Together," she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. And for the first time in her life, she did not feel alone. The journey back to the kingdom was surreal. Amara rode on a horse beside Kofi, still dressed in her simple hunter's clothes, while royal knights surrounded her in a formation of honor. The people who passed on the road stopped to look, their faces showing confusion, curiosity, and in some cases, recognition. "It is him! It is the king! He is alive!" "But who is that woman?" The questions followed them like shadows. Amara tried to ignore them, but every glance, every whispered comment, stirred memories of her village, of being watched, judged, deemed unworthy. When they finally reached the palace, Amara had to hold back a sigh. It was not merely a house. It was a magnificent fortress, with towers that touched the sky and walls that seemed impenetrable. And within those walls, she knew there were people who would not understand her, who would judge her, who would say that she did not belong there. And she was right. The court was assembled in the great hall when they entered. Counselors, nobles, generals, all dressed in fine clothes and sharp looks. Silence fell like a blade when Kofi entered with Amara at his side. "Majesty," an old man with a white beard stepped forward, bowing respectfully. "Thank the ancestors you are safe. We feared the worst." "I am alive thanks to this woman," Kofi said, his voice echoing in the hall. "Amara, she saved me when I was at the brink of death." Everyone's eyes turned to her. Amara felt their weight as never before. These were not the simple gazes of villagers. These were cold, calculating, evaluating her worth with a precision that found her wanting. "A hunter?" a feminine voice said, tinged with disdain. It was a woman dressed in expensive silks, jewels glittering on her neck. "You were saved by a hunter?" "I was saved by a warrior," Kofi corrected, his voice cold. "By someone with more courage than many in this room." A murmur rippled through the court. Amara could read the expressions. Shock, disapproval, and on many faces something darker. Fear that an outsider, a woman with no name or position, held influence over their king. "Majesty," the old counselor said carefully. "Surely we are all grateful for the bravery of this woman. But there are matters of state that require your urgent attention. The conspiracy has not been completely eradicated, and there are alliances that need to be strengthened." "Matrimonial alliances," a voice cut through. It was a younger man, dressed in the colors of a neighboring kingdom. "Princess Zara still awaits your answer, Majesty. A union between our kingdoms would strengthen both against external threats." Kofi tensed beside Amara. She did not need to ask what this meant. Politics, strategy, arranged marriages to create alliances. She knew these stories. And she knew that in this world, a hunter with no title or dowry had no place. "I have already given my answer," Kofi said, his voice calm but firm. The ambassador blinked. "Forgive me, Majesty, but we have not received—" "My answer," Kofi interrupted, turning to look directly at the man, "is no. I will not marry Princess Zara or anyone else chosen for political convenience." The hall exploded in whispers. Amara saw expressions of shock, anger, confusion. The old counselor looked as though he was about to have a fit. "But Majesty, the alliance will be strengthened through other means," Kofi said. "Trade, military agreements, diplomacy, but not through my marriage." "So, who do you intend to marry?" the counselor asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer and dreaded having it confirmed. Kofi turned to Amara, his eyes finding hers. In them she saw certainty, determination, and something more, something that made her heart race. "With her," Kofi said simply. "With Amara, the woman who saved my life. The woman who showed me what true nobility is." The silence that followed was so complete that Amara could hear her own heart beating. Then, like a wave breaking, the court erupted. "Impossible! A commoner as queen? This is an outrage!" "Your Majesty, you cannot be serious." Voices overlapped, each more indignant than the last. Amara wanted to shrink away, to disappear, to flee from a place where she clearly wasn't welcome. But Kofi's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers, holding firm. "I am completely serious," Kofi said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Amara will be my queen. This isn't a suggestion. It's a decision." "But tradition," began the counselor. "Tradition," Kofi interrupted, "says the king must choose someone of noble character. And her character is nobler than that of anyone born in a palace." The jeweled woman, whom Amara now realized was a duchess of some kind, stepped forward. "And what will the people say? A queen without lineage, without proper education, without what?" Kofi challenged. "Without the appearance you expect? Without the fragility you value? She has strength. She has courage. She has compassion. These are the qualities of a true leader." "The people will never accept this," the ambassador said, his voice ice cold. "This will create instability. It will weaken your position." "Then the people will learn," Kofi said, "that true strength does not come from appearances or titles. It comes from what is in here." He touched his own chest. "And if they cannot see the strength in Amara, then they are blind." Amara squeezed his hand, her heart torn between overwhelming gratitude and paralyzing fear. He was fighting for her, against his own court, against tradition, against everything. But would it be enough? "There is also," said a new voice coming from the shadows of the hall, "the matter of her family." A man dressed as a messenger stepped forward, holding a scroll. "News has arrived from your village, miss, your family. They heard that you are here, in the palace, with the king." Amara felt her stomach drop. Her family, the very people who had rejected her, who had made her feel like an unwanted burden. They knew, and if they knew. "And?" Kofi asked, his voice dangerously calm. "They are coming here," the messenger said. "They claim they have the right to speak on this matter. That as her family they must have a voice in the decision." A bitter laugh escaped Amara before she could stop it. "My family," she said, her voice trembling not from fear but from barely contained anger. "Abandoned me, rejected me, said I was an embarrassment, and now that there's an advantage to be gained, now they want to say?" The hall grew quiet again. Even the most vocal opponents seemed uncomfortable with this revelation. Kofi turned to her completely, both hands now holding hers. "Then let's prove to all of them that they were wrong. Your family, this court, anyone who doubted you. Let's show that you're not just adequate to be queen. You are the only choice." "But how?" Amara whispered. "How can I prove something to people who have already decided that I have no value?" A small, almost sad smile touched Kofi's lips. "By being yourself. By being exactly who you are. Because who you are is extraordinary." The old counselor cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable yet determined. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, perhaps there might be a middle ground. Perhaps Miss Amara could remain in the palace as a consultant? A personal guardian? There would be honor in that without the complication of—" "No," Kofi said firmly. "I won't insult Amara by offering her a lesser title when she deserves the greatest. She'll be queen or nothing." "Then," the Duchess said, her voice cold as ice, "we must see if she's capable of performing the role. There are protocols. There are expectations. There is a standard that must be maintained." Amara felt the trap closing in. They were going to test her. They'd put her in situations designed for her to fail, where her lack of formal education or improper manners would be exposed. And then they'd say, "You see? She's not good enough." But before she could speak, before she could protest or agree, Kofi spoke again. "There will be a test," he said. "A final test. But it won't be your protocols or the artificial expectations of this court." "Then what, Your Majesty?" the counselor asked, sounding genuinely curious. Kofi looked around the hall, his gaze sweeping across each face, each expression of doubt and disapproval. Then he smiled, and there was something defiant in that smile. "It will be a test of character, of strength, of everything that truly matters in a leader. And when Amara passes, and she will pass, there will be no more doubts. There will be no more objections." The hall fell into tense silence. Amara could feel the weight of everyone's gaze upon her. She could feel the expectations, the judgments, the doubts, but she could also feel Kofi's hand in hers, firm, constant, confident. "What test?" she asked in a low voice, only to him. Kofi leaned in, his voice a whisper meant only for her ears. "Trust me, and more importantly, trust yourself. You're stronger than any challenge they can present." But even as he spoke, Amara could read the expressions on the faces around her. They were scheming, planning, already thinking of ways to prove her inadequate. And somewhere, approaching the palace, was her family. The people who had made her feel that she would never be good enough. A final test, Kofi had said. But Amara had the feeling that this test would be harder than anything she had ever faced. Because it wouldn't be just about physical strength or hunting ability. It would be about proving her worth to people who had already decided she had none. And while she stood there, in the great hall, surrounded by veiled opponents and uncertain allies, A single question echoed in her mind. How do you prove you are worthy to those who refuse to see your dignity? But fate was not yet finished testing Amara. Because sometimes true strength is not proven in the battles we choose, but in those that find us when we least expect it. It was a quiet morning when the messenger arrived at the palace, covered in dust and exhaustion. His words made the blood of the royal council freeze. An invading army was marching toward the kingdom. Thousands of warriors, commanded by a warlord who had already conquered 3 neighboring kingdoms. And they would be at the city's gates in 3 days. Panic spread through the court like fire through dry grass. The elder councilmen, those who had always questioned Amara's presence, began shouting at each other, proposing surrender, flight, impossible negotiations. Caleb watched the chaos with a heavy heart, knowing his kingdom was unprepared for a war of this magnitude. It was then that a voice cut through the tumult, firm, clear, unquestionable. I will go. Everyone turned. Amara was standing, her eyes fixed on the king with that same determination he had seen when she saved him from the bandits. The same strength that had made her different from the beginning. Your Majesty, she said, her voice echoing through the council chamber. You need someone who can face this warlord. Someone who is not afraid to fight. Let me lead the kingdom's defense. The silence that followed was absolute. And then, as was expected, came the explosion. A woman? Leading our army? The eldest councilman's voice dripped with contempt. This is ridiculous. Never in the history of this kingdom has a woman commanded troops in battle. She is strong, yes, another added, his tone dismissive. But brute strength alone does not win wars. We need strategy, experience, a proven commander. One by one, the councilmen stood up, their voices overlapping in a chorus of rejection. It was as if all the years of doubt, all the unspoken suspicions, all the carefully hidden prejudices had finally found an outlet. The muscular princess, the woman who didn't fit in, was asking for too much. This they could not allow. Amara stood unmoved through the storm of objections, her expression serene. She had faced rejection her entire life. A few more voices would make no difference to her. But then, a figure rose from the back of the room. It was Malik, the rival who had been defeated in the tournament. Everyone expected him to join the chorus of criticism. Instead, his words surprised everyone. I fought her, Malik said, his voice grave and respectful. And I can say with absolute certainty, none of you, none of us, could have defeated her. She is not just strong. She thinks while she fights. She anticipates. She adapts. If there is anyone in this kingdom capable of facing this army, it is her. The unexpected testimony created a crack in the opposition, but it was not enough. The chief councilman turned to Caleb with a thinly veiled ultimatum. Your Majesty, if you allow this woman to command our army, and if she fails, the responsibility will fall upon your crown. The people will never forgive you. It was the final move, the attempt to force Caleb to choose between his position and Amara. Between what was politically safe and what was right. Caleb looked at Amara. She said nothing, but her eyes conveyed everything. I can do this. Trust me. And he trusted. The command is hers, Caleb announced, his voice cutting through the tumult. Princess Amara will lead the defense of this kingdom, and those who refuse to follow her can join the cowards who propose surrender. The king had spoken, and with his words, the fate of the kingdom was sealed. In the 3 days that followed, Amara transformed an unprepared city into a fortress. She did not waste time trying to win the approval of skeptical generals. Instead, she went directly to the people, to the blacksmiths, to the farmers, to the women who were considered too weak to fight. You said that strength does not belong to a woman, she called out to the crowd gathered in the main square. Well then, let us see if weakness can defend a kingdom. Let us see if conformity can stop an invader. Or perhaps, just perhaps it is time to show that true strength has always belonged to those who were underestimated. And something extraordinary happened. Women who had never held a weapon began to step forward. Women who had never held a weapon stepped forward. Men who had been considered too old or too young joined the ranks. The entire kingdom, inspired by that princess who refused to be defined by the expectations of others, rose as one. When the invading army arrived, they expected to find a kingdom terrorized, ready to surrender. Instead, they found Amara waiting on the walls, her army positioned with strategic precision that would impress any veteran general. The warlord, a massive man covered in scars from 1,000 battles, laughed when he saw a woman commanding the defenses. Is this a joke? He shouted across the plain. Send your true warriors, woman, before I destroy these walls and everything you love. Amara didn't answer with words. She answered with action. When the invading army attacked, they discovered that brute strength couldn't match brilliant strategy. Amara had studied the warlord's tactics, learned his patterns, anticipated his movements. Every trap he set she had foreseen. Every advance he made she had prepared a counter. And when the critical moment came, when the warlord finally broke through the first line of defense, and it seemed that all was lost, Amara did something no commander had done before. She descended from the walls and challenged him personally. "Do you want this kingdom?" she cried, her voice thundering across the battlefield. "Then you'll have to come through me first. Not through my army, not through my traps, through me." The silence that fell over the battlefield was absolute. Thousands of warriors from both sides stopped fighting to witness that impossible moment. A woman, alone, challenging the most feared warlord of the continent. He accepted. How could he not? What followed was not just a fight. It was a demonstration. Every movement of Amara was pure precision. Every blow carried not just physical strength, but years of perfected technique. Decades of perseverance against adversity. The warlord, accustomed to winning through brutality, discovered that he was fighting something completely different. He was fighting a woman who had transformed every rejection into determination, every insult into strength, every "you cannot" into "watch me do it." When Amara finally knocked him down, her foot on the chest of the defeated warlord, something extraordinary happened. The invaders did not attack. Instead, one by one, they began to lower their weapons. Because in many warrior cultures, when their leader falls in honorable single combat, the war ends. The kingdom was saved, and everyone, absolutely everyone, witnessed who had saved it. The news spread like lightning, not just through the kingdom of Caleb, but beyond it. The story of the muscular princess who defeated a warlord, who saved an entire kingdom, who proved that strength has no gender. It reached the village where Amara came from. It reached the ears of those who once called her an aberration, inadequate, a woman no man would want. And with the news came something Amara never expected to receive: apologies. Letters began to arrive at the palace, from village elders acknowledging their blindness, from young women saying that Amara had inspired them to accept their own differences, from men who admitted that they had let prejudice blind their judgment. Her family also wrote words of pride, of regret, of belated recognition of what had always been clear. Amara never needed to change. It was the world that needed to change its way of seeing. The official coronation ceremony of Amara as princess consort and royal commander was held a month later, and it was unlike anything the kingdom had ever witnessed. It was not just a celebration of union. It was a celebration of transformation. The hall was filled not just with nobles, but with common people. The women who had fought alongside Amara, the blacksmiths who had forged the weapons, the farmers who had defended their lands, all those who had been called not enough, and who proved they were far more than enough. When Caleb placed the crown on Amara's head, his words echoed through the hall. "This kingdom was accustomed to defining value by conformity," he said, his voice steady and clear. "But today, we recognize a greater truth. True value lies in authenticity. True strength lies in being exactly who you are, without apologies, without diminishing yourself, without hiding." He turned to Amara, his eyes shining with emotion. "You did not save me only from bandits on that road. You saved this kingdom from its own narrowness of vision. And for that, not just I, but this entire nation is eternally grateful." The ovation that followed shook the very foundations of the palace, and Amara, the woman who was once considered inadequate, who had been rejected for her difference, who had been seen as a problem to be corrected, stood before her people as the savior of a nation. But perhaps the most powerful moment wasn't the public ceremony. It was what happened afterward, when the hall emptied and Amara found herself alone in the palace gardens, gazing toward the horizon where that battle had been fought. But perhaps the most powerful moment was not the public ceremony. It was what happened afterward, when the hall emptied and Amara found herself alone in the palace gardens, gazing toward the horizon where that battle had been fought. Caleb found her there, and for a long moment, they simply stood side by side in comfortable silence. "Did you ever doubt?" he finally asked. "When the entire council opposed you? When they said you could not lead? Did you ever think of giving up?" Amara smiled, that small, knowing smile he had learned to recognize. "All the days of my life, I was told what I could not be," she answered softly. "But you know what I learned? When the entire world says you cannot, and you prove that you can, you don't just change your destiny, you change the definition of what is possible." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the light of the sunset. "I did not fight that battle only for this kingdom, Caleb. I fought for every girl who is called too strong, for every woman judged inadequate for refusing to fit an invented mold. I fought to prove that our value does not lie in meeting expectations, but in exceeding them completely." Caleb took her hand, that hand which wielded a sword with as much skill as it offered gentleness. "And you proved it magnificently," he said. "Our kingdom will never be the same, and that is entirely thanks to you." The months that followed proved his words true. Under the joint leadership of Caleb and Amara, the kingdom flourished in ways no one had imagined. Amara established training academies open to all, regardless of gender or social origin. She reshaped the army to value skill over conformity, strategy over tradition. And more importantly, she became a symbol, not just for that kingdom, but for all the neighboring kingdoms. Young women traveled from distant lands just to see her, to confirm that the legend was real, that it was possible to be strong and feminine, that it was possible to be different and valuable, that it was possible to rewrite the rules. The royal council, those same men who had opposed her leadership so fiercely, now consulted her on all important decisions, because they had learned in the most dramatic way possible that wisdom does not come from conformity, but from perspective. And Amara, with her lifetime of defying expectations, had a perspective that no one else could offer. Years later, when travelers visited the kingdom and asked about its prosperity, about its strength, about its reputation for justice and innovation, the answer was always the same. Everything changed when a princess that no man wanted saved the king that everyone admired. And together, they taught us that the greatest power does not lie in conforming, but in having the courage to be authentic. The story of Amara and Caleb spread across the entire continent, carried by bards and storytellers. But the version that touched hearts the most was always the simplest. Once upon a time, there was a woman considered inadequate, who proved to be exactly what the world needed. And if you listen carefully, even today, in villages and cities, when young women are criticized for being too strong, too different, too inadequate, there is always someone who whispers the ancient wisdom that Amara embodied. The tree that doesn't bend in the wind isn't stubborn, it has deep roots. It's an ancient West African proverb, and it speaks to a truth that transcends cultures and generations. Those who stand firm in their authenticity, who refuse to bend to others' expectations, aren't difficult or problematic. They're rooted in a deeper truth about who they are. Amara was that tree, and her roots were so deep that when the world finally stopped trying to bend her and began to learn from her strength, everything changed. The kingdom that once valued conformity learned to celebrate difference. The court that once feared change became a champion of innovation. And the people who once judged value by appearances learned to recognize greatness in unexpected forms. But perhaps the most profound transformation was not in the kingdom, but in those who heard the story. Because every time someone tells the story of the muscular princess who saved the unknown king, something awakens in the listener's heart. It's the reminder that our value doesn't depend on others' approval. It's the confirmation that our differences aren't flaws to be corrected, but gifts to be honored. It's the promise that somewhere, somehow, there's a place where we'll be valued exactly as we are. And perhaps, just perhaps, that place does not need to be found. Perhaps it needs to be created. Just as Amara created it, not just through her strength, but through her unwavering refusal to be anything other than authentic. You who have followed us this far, who have witnessed this journey from rejection to redemption, from loneliness to royalty, from being inadequate to becoming irreplaceable, you now know a truth that the world often tries to hide. True strength never lies in conforming. It lies in remaining authentic until the world learns to recognize your value. Amara did not change to fit into the world. She remained steadfast until the world changed to accommodate her. And in that process, she did not merely save a kingdom. She redefined what a kingdom could be. This is the ancestral wisdom that echoes through the generations. This is the power living in each one of us who has ever been called too much or too little. And this is the legacy of a princess who proved that the greatest act of courage is not to change who you are, but to have the audacity to remain exactly as you are, until the world learns to appreciate your magnificence. If this story touched your heart, if you saw a bit of yourself in Amara, if you too have been deemed inadequate for simply being authentic, then share this wisdom. Subscribe to our channel for more stories where justice prevails, where strength is honored, and where those who are different not only survive, but thrive. Though Amara's journey may have ended, her message lives on. And there are many other stories waiting to be told. Stories of triumph over adversity, of authenticity over conformity, of truth restoring dignity. The next story is already waiting. And just as Amara proved that the impossible is only what has not yet been attempted, the stories yet to come will show that ancestral wisdom never ages, never loses relevance, and never fails to inspire. Until next time, remember, you do not need to bow to the wind. You only need roots deep enough to stand tall. And when you stand, the entire world will eventually learn to dance to your rhythm.